We'll read our mission statement to start. We at Center Grove develop knowledgeable, confident, and responsible citizens through inspirational and innovative learning opportunities. We always start our board meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mrs. Carol Toomey is going to lead us this evening.
Please stand, everyone. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Toomey. Joe, we're going to do what we did last time we had a remote member. When we take a roll call vote on any issue, we'll take a vote within the room first, and then I'll ask you specifically for your vote. That way it'll assist Pam in trying to record the votes. Does that work for you? You might be muted. Can you hear us, Joe?
Says he's talking, but we can't hear him.
But it also doesn't say he's muted, so.
Is it at his end or ours?
Jason, can you help us real quick on a? I do too, but Joe, we can't hear you, so if there's anything you can do on your end to try to, there, we see you now. You know,
He acts like he's not hearing us.
Joe, can you try to talk so we can see if we can hear you?
Says we're muted. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, he's not hearing us.
Pardon us for our technical issues. Unfortunately, this happens in today's world.
I'll try to text him.
So does anybody know any good jokes or?
What if we go back to the podium?
Joe, can you hear us now?
I can hear you.
Perfect. Good work. Good work. All right, Joe, as I said, we're going to, when we take votes internally, we're going to, everybody here verbally vote, and then I'll go back to you for an individual vote, so we make sure we get it recorded. And if you have questions or comments on each, I'll make sure I call it out specifically, so if that'll allow you to participate. So we appreciate you participating, even though you couldn't be here tonight. First, has everybody had a chance to take a look at the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. President, I move that we accept the agenda as presented.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander and Mrs. Toomey. All those in favor of accepting the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mr. Hubbard?
I'm an aye.
All right. Ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you.
To start this evening, we have a report that's going to be provided on blended learning for secondary schools. I believe, Dr. Argonoff, you are going to get us started on the report.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I am. And this evening, helping me will be Mrs. Amy Norman and also Mrs. Nora Hoover. I'm going to kick it off, and they're going to wrap it up, I think. So I'll start off by just talking a little bit about why we're making the change. We shared this out in a coffee chat not too long ago, and also last week in a few emails. We're focusing on the secondary. As you know, we had some issues with the COVID-related absences and the impact in the number of students, and it concerned us. So we were looking to take a more proactive measure as a school corporation to reduce down that potential spread. So what we were looking to do is reduce the numbers required to quarantine, fewer individuals in the classrooms and other spaces, and move and be able to make more social distancing possible in the secondary schools. We have just unique issues with secondary, differs from the elementary, so we're able to accommodate space better in most of our elementaries. We also don't have the number issue that we had in the secondary. So our goal is to return to in-person learning as soon as possible, and our fear was that we would end up having more numbers. So if we go to the next slide, Pam. Oh, sorry, Jason, thanks. So you can see this is what concerned us, the administration and our staff. We, first week, had 58 students out for COVID-related absences, and then within 1 week, we more than quadrupled our number to 316. So we were concerned about this and was worried that if this is a trend and double again, or quadruple again, we were gonna be in some serious trouble. So we wanted to take that proactive approach, or that, and I'll say a little bit reactive approach, by doing e-learning this week and trying to put some time and distance between the students in the building. And so we did that this week, and then we want to try and ease back into it next week and see if it makes a difference with the social distancing. Now, we were operating under one set of rules, as everyone here knows, and then, of course, they changed yesterday. So we have some additional rules or changes in the rules, which Mrs. Norman's going to kind of share with you now. Some of that, some of it good, some of it not so good. But we're going to talk about that.
Good evening.
Amy,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks for having me. A few of the things that we want to talk about are some of the definitions of what we're dealing with. So, and a lot of times these terms get mixed around. And that can then create some different issues when we mix up the terms. So I want to kind of get the record straight with that. Isolation equals symptoms, or a person who is tested positive, okay? And what that looks like is a person who is sick with COVID or is asymptomatic and has tested with COVID, and that equals 10 days that they are out. Quarantine is what happens to a person who is in close contact with somebody who is a confirmed positive case of COVID. The idea behind quarantining people is that since they've been around other people who we know are sick, then they are more likely to potentially get sick themselves, which can then cause them to spread it to other folks. So the goal is you quarantine, and helps to stop the spread. Quarantine equals 14 days. That generally creates a little bit of confusion because the sick people only have 10 and the quarantine people have 14. Part of that is because the CDC's determined people develop symptoms 2 to 14 days after exposure. So hence the 14 days, whereas a person who has actually developed COVID after 10 days, the belief is they're no longer as contagious or able to pass that on to other individuals. So the big kicker is the close contact. Close contact, as defined by the CDC, the Indiana State Health Department, the Johnson County Health Department, is that if you are within 6 feet of a confirmed case, and they changed this week. It used to be it was just for 15 minutes or more. Now it's cumulative, so a total of 15 minutes or more. This can be in one time sitting with somebody. It also can be in multiple interactions within a single day. The examples that were given to me were if you had 2 people standing in the hallway and they were having a conversation for 5 minutes, the one person walked away, got a cup of coffee, came back, talked to that individual again for another 10 minutes. That's a total of 15 minutes. That's now considered a high-risk exposure event. So that plays into this close contact component, and it is all has to do with the 6 feet. The other things that they have added in this week were providing care at home to somebody who is sick with COVID, which kind of makes sense. If you've had direct physical contact with somebody, such as hugging them or kissing them, if you've shared eating or drinking utensils, or if a confirmed case has sneezed all over you. So you don't have to wait 15 minutes for that to have an effect. So what that looks like in our setting is that if a person tests positive, the quarantine procedures are that they are going to be asked about their close contacts. Okay, in the school, so from in our world, what that looks like, the state actually has a contact tracing group that contacts the individuals when they hit the state database as being positive. From a school setting, what that looks like is we look at the people throughout their day that they would have been within that 6 feet of. If that person was asymptomatic, and the other thing to remember is all of this happens like the 2 days prior to a person developing symptoms. That's the dates that we look at. If they are asymptomatic and tested positive, we look at the 2 days prior to the date that that test was given. And again, it's that total, that's 6 feet. So when we find out that somebody has tested positive, we find out either through the Johnson County Health Department contacting me, I'm in daily conversations with them, or the family contacts the school corporation and lets us know. At that point, I notify the building administrators. We then start determining close contacts. What that looks like is we look at the schedule, we look at seating charts. I measure distances in classrooms if that's necessary, depending on how rooms are set up. I can tell you that sitting diagonally in the high school cafeteria is 2.5 feet. Some of our classrooms are able to get to 6 feet in certain directions, but not in all directions. At that point, once we narrow down that list and we determine who the close contacts are, there's a representative from the school corporation. Generally, that's myself, Mr. Taylor, other administrators in the building. We contact home with a personal phone call. We explain what has occurred, which is just that their student has come in close contact with a confirmed case. And then I follow that up with a letter from the Johnson County Health Department explaining the dates, again, of what that 14 days look like, when that student can return to the building, as well as what quarantine kind of is. We then also make a notation in Skyward so that through the attendance process, parents are not receiving a daily call letting them know that their student is not in school, because obviously they know that already. So this is kind of what, in a traditional model with school, and kind of what we had that first week or so. When we look at 3 to 5 feet, it feels like it should be easy to achieve, but 3 to 5 feet is not enough. It needs to be 6. So like in this example, this would, this quarantines 5 people. In a situation where the person sits in the middle of the room, that's 9 kids that are out, and they're out for 14 days. Strictly because they sat next to somebody who was COVID positive, and they didn't know. It has absolutely nothing to do with them interacting with one another. This is irregardless of face coverings. The purpose of the face covering is that quarantine is an annoyance in someone's life and they don't actually get sick. But the CDC has stated that irregardless of a face covering, you're still going to get quarantined. Even now they've added that even if you have a big plastic barrier in front of you, you're still going to get quarantined. In looking at a blended model, we have less people in a room. That allows us to spread out more. The one positive person here results in only 2 kids getting quarantined. It helps us alleviate that roller coaster that kids get put on if we have less people in the room. It helps us to kind of maintain learning, keep people on a consistent path with it, because you just don't know who you're sitting by that this could happen, right? This week, I feel that we got a little bit of a bonus from the CDC. They adjusted what symptoms are. So originally, congestion and runny nose was a symptom. That's been taken off the table. I can tell you that the clinic staff said hallelujah. It's allergy season. It's been rough trying to figure, we cannot diagnose people who come into the clinic. You can't tell looking at somebody who has this. So there were some adjustments made. Now we have, a temperature of 100.0. That is actually our threshold that we have had set for, I don't know how many years here at Center Grove. So it does differ from what the CDC has. That was actually a conscious decision because we didn't feel it was right to up the temperature threshold during a pandemic. I felt that might be a little bit rough. So we have a temperature of 100.0 or higher, sore throat. And typically, when we discuss cough, it's typically an uncontrolled cough, diarrhea, vomiting, severe headaches. The new loss of taste or smell is kind of the one that's kind of key to this. And generally, if somebody's running a fever, they also have like the muscle aches and body fatigue and things. that was the health portion.
Thank you, Amy. So now Mrs. Hoover is going to come up and share with you about the blended learning model and what we're looking at there.
Yes, thank you. And I know that's why a lot of you are here tonight, because it's all about questions. What does this look for like for our children? Because some of those things we do not have control over, but we do need to respond, and we need to do that every moment, thinking of what is best for students in the classroom and what do we as educators need to do to make our great education continue. And so I want to spend some time talking about what blended learning means, because we haven't done that before, and a lot of people have a lot of trepidation about that, and we want to paint a picture a little bit better for our parents so that they can understand that. And I want to start by just saying, in this crazy year, our goal is, as always, to deliver an exceptional educational experience to all of our students. The difference is that for this year, we tagged on to that no matter where our students and our teachers are sitting. Because we're not going to be able to control that all year, but it doesn't matter. We have to figure out how to do that in all three environments that are in that traditional model. We stressed this summer that how important in-person education is and how much we value what our teachers do that is irreplicable completely online. We know that. I like to tell them they're the talent of this group in that sense. And we have a lot of value for the work our teachers do every day. But knowing things need to be different this year, knowing that the content has to be a full curriculum, how do we respond to that and work with our teachers to make sure that happens? And so that has been the goal of our whole summer. We've worked hand in hand with administrators and teachers to do that. So I'm going to explain a little bit what that'll look like. So blended learning is defined by some characteristics. There's the in-person modality, and we also have the tech modality where kids will be at home. Now that doesn't mean being on the computer the whole time. There may be other things they're doing that are hands-on. There are students who have been picking up ceramics, clay, this week from the high school to do things that they are directed to do online and they can do that work at home. So our teachers are going to get really creative. I'm very sure of that because they're amazing. They're just having to figure out how to do those things. In the past, blended learning really meant at the elementary were a lot of stations going from different types of activities, and blended now really has become the in-person or the at-home, and that it's probably a new pandemic term that we're getting used to. This would be our schedule. Obviously, this week we're on e-learning, not a blended model, but next week all of our students would be in school 2 days a week at our secondary schools, with Wednesday being an all at-home learning environment for students. And the following week, we've dedicated that if we have shortened weeks, that we won't, we'll do Wednesdays different. We'll do a full 2-day rotation to maximize that face time with our students in those weeks. This is where the rubber meets the road, because this is the first step, and that is planning for the instruction that needs to take place in the classroom. And I really wanted to define that by 3 questions. And the first thing as a teacher they're going to think of is, how do I create an exceptional educational experience for my child, the children in my class that I would have done if they were sitting here every day? And that work starts with a process we call backwards mapping. I look at my unit, I look at my week, and I don't only teach on the days they're in front of me. I need to think about, I still have 5 days with students, but they're not all in front of me, so how do I make that work? And that's what teachers have been doing this week when they're all away, but next week will be different because they're going to have face-to-face time, so how do they maximize that time with their students? And also capture some of that time. They need to think about what are they going to do when they're home. And so it's a very thoughtful lesson planning, and they have to think differently because they can't do what they've always done. So there's a lot of collaboration, especially at the secondary level where they're already working by courses so much, and they're really trying to maximize each other's strengths to help provide the best thing we can for kids. The next part of the process is that instruction. So now that I know what I need to teach, what's on the docket for this week that kids need to learn, I need to then think as a teacher, how do I effectively deliver that instruction? And this is where they have to adapt lessons and content to match how they're going to see kids that week. We have been working with our secondary schools, and we've suggested at this point 4 different models and ways to do that. We didn't want a one-size-fits-all because we know in life we're not a one-size-fit-all, any of us as humans. And teaching is so much about style, and we did not want to deprive our teachers of that because that's what makes them special. So we wanted different models for style for teachers, but also because based on what you're teaching that week, one model works better, some certain strategies. The next week I might be teaching something different, and I want to use a different model because that fits more with the content. So we wanted to really take into consideration, especially at the secondary level when they're content specialists, that they could have that kind of flexibility. And then the last part is that pacing. How long will it take students to learn what I'm teaching, what they need to learn this week? And that's probably the hardest part. I know for my own children who are e-learning this week, some things take a short time and some things are feeling like there's some really long days. And that pacing is the hardest part for teachers in the classroom, even when they're sitting with kids, knowing how long something's going to take, because we see it one way, and then when a kid starts to do it, it doesn't go that smoothly. Or some things they pick up on really fast. It should have taken a half an hour, and they do it in 10 minutes. So that pace part is more difficult. And so as parents, they may see some long days, and they may see some short ones. And that'll vary teacher to teacher, class to class, day to day. At the end of the day, what we want, though, is that all the stuff we want to teach this week gets taught and kids are learning it. So that's the end goal, again, no matter where kids and where teachers are sitting. One other caveat, I would suggest if parents are out there really struggling with too much work, too little work, reach out to the teacher and share your concerns, because we want to make sure we're meeting needs and not seeing students every day. That's harder. And so that communication back and forth with teachers is going to be extra important in any model, always, but particularly when we don't see our students every day. The next part, what does this mean for students? I think as parents sitting at home, you're wondering what my students should be doing. And so so how will students learn new material? And they will still receive direct instruction. They're going to be with their teacher each day, but there's more ways to receive direct instruction than sitting in the classroom. And that direct instruction is also processing and participating in class. As an English and social studies teacher, the value of discussion in teaching is something I really valued and supported student learning, and we don't want to take that away from our teachers. So that will continue, and that can be in person, it could be during live lessons with students, or it could be through pre-recorded videos with online feedback forms. We have all these tools in our disposal that we can use with our students. So there'll be a lot of different ways to engage with learning, just as they do in the classroom, a lot of different strategies. And then how will they be engaged? And you're going to see your students obviously 2 days a week at school, and you're going to see that Canvas instruction 3 days a week. And hopefully, a lot of teachers are starting their live lessons this week, and I think Wednesday when they can pull all the kids together, we'll see a lot of that. We may see some live instruction in other places too, even when students are sitting at home. I also think people want to know what's different than last spring. And the biggest one is that first bullet. Our course content expectations are what they were pre-March, was it 15th, 2020? Because when we had to drop what we were normally doing and change for the pandemic and our school closure, we responded to that appropriately, but we need to pick that ball back up, and we're going to teach all of our curriculum. And we're going to work really hard to get that done and recover academic loss that we know students have from last spring. And so it's a tall order for our teachers. And we know the in-person piece is the best, which is why the blended model, if we have to take those safety precautions, we don't want to lose totally that in-person instruction, and because of how much value we place in it. The other we'll have our typical grading processes, and assignment due dates won't be at the end of e-learning. We're going to have to monitor that instruction and that learning all along, just like we would any normal year. So those pieces will be as normal as possible. How kids get instruction, how teachers are delivering learning is going to look different in our blended environment. Just a few last details. Our cafeteria and hallways, our distancing will increase greatly with this model. Obviously, Mrs. Norman showed us what the classroom will look like and how much difference there will be in spacing. Students will have scheduled live classes sessions. Those could be on Wednesdays. They could be at home on learning days. The teachers will figure out as they're planning that backwards plan what that can look like that week. At the high school, we're going to have pink days. And part of that is because if we stayed with block, teachers realized very quickly, I will only see students once a week. And they wanted the multiple times where they could see them face to face, and while shorter, they wanted to maximize that time differently. Our C9 students will go every day, and we'll provide transportation from here, even if it's not their in-person group day. Our food service program will be serving meals for kids to take home. They can just go up at the end of lunch and swipe and buy those, and for our students who are in free and reduced, those will be purchased the same process they use for their lunches. We will have mental health supports available. If families need that, just reach out to guidance counselors and social workers, and we're going to connect kids to things that they need. We have those available. We're also continuing with precautions our athletics and extracurricular activities, because we know how important those are to our students' social, emotional, and physical development. And again, we'll try to continue to make as many things as normal as possible, even when it's not, with obviously the goal to always go back to traditional learning when we can.
Thank you, Nora. A couple of things, and then I think we'll take some questions. First of all, as you know, our ultimate goal is to return back to in-person as soon as possible. Our goal is after these first 2 weeks of blended learning, as long as we do not have any significant number changes, that's where we're hoping to go. And of course, as long as the CDC or anyone else doesn't change any rules. Also, too, people are wondering, well, how are we going to decide this and when are we going to decide this? And so we plan to collect data next week, and by the end of the first week, which is Friday, the 4th, we'll review that data and then update the community on what the next steps will be the week of September 14th. As I shared, our goal is to come back the week of September 14th completely back in person. The data that we'll look at is the data we've been looking at, and mostly that COVID-related absences. And if we're seeing that we're having an impact on that and that we're able to keep that flat or drop, then I think that would be a good sign for us to be able to go back to in-person learning, fully in-person.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Arkman. At this point, does anybody on the board have any questions or comments with respect to the presentation?
I'd like to hear from Mr. Smith and Dr. Hart. Sorry, guys, to put you on the spot, but, I mean, you guys, these are your buildings, and maybe even Dr. Henderson a little bit. I mean, these are your buildings. You've seen the models and the social distancing. What is your guys' thoughts on the blended learning and effective instruction?
I guess since I got waved up, I'm first, right? So,
I'm digging the matching.
yeah, thank you,
mask
thank you.
tonight.
You kind of stick out.
Yeah. You got to have some fun with all this. So first off, thank you for having me up here, and thank you for your questions. So I think what the community hired us to do first and foremost is keep kids safe, and always take that as our priority. It's the hardest decision I think any of us have ever had to make, because those of you that are out there that know me, having a kid inside the building and being face-to-face with kids is an energy we can't replicate. It's what we got into this for. So it really comes down to when we saw those numbers starting to increase last Thursday, and we knew that we needed to make a difference that would keep kids more safe. And the high school had talked about moving to the model of blended as maybe the best answer for right now, not for now on, but for right now. It all came down to the distancing of our students, and trying to get that 6-foot hula hoop, is what I like to call it, all of our kids outside of the 6-foot hula hoop with each other. So that's what we were able to do by going blended. And again, still see their faces. I mean, it's better than e-learning all week long, where you don't have that interaction and that power. When you bring students down to that number, what I'm very hopeful for is that we can really maximize really good, strong instruction with a small group that might help us accelerate even when we're slowing down. I know that sounds weird, but having taught an intervention classroom as a teacher before I went in, and I taught with somebody in this room, there's some power that you can have when you get that small group and you can really get momentum going. And then with that educational process, which is you do your good, solid, direct instruction, you do guided practice, and then you give them that opportunity to do independent practice, and you give them feedback. We're hopeful that we can replicate that. Not as great as it is in person, because we can't. But the closest thing right now with keeping kids safe is to do it in a model where we can do as close to that as we can. And we believe that to be blended at the moment. So that's our goal. And next week and the week after will be our tell, if and when and how we can do that. And that's our goal at the moment. So I hope that answers your question. And if there's anything else, I'd be happy to turn it over to one of my colleagues.
No, thank you, Mr. Smith. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it. Dr. Harp or Dr. Henderson, you guys got any thoughts?
Yeah, I would second what Mr. Smith said, and thank you guys for asking, and thank you all for listening to our input as well. So, you know, Mr. Smith talked a lot about the numbers and our concern for the way the numbers were trending. And what really was a powerful visual for me was when our team went into a classroom and sat in one of those desks like we saw in the diagram that Mrs. Norman was showing. And we extended the tape measure out 6 feet, and we went like this around the desk. And numbers are very important, but also we're educators, and it's the visual representation of what that could mean for the kids that were sitting in those desks, surrounding that desk. And for me, you know, the biggest concern was a kid who comes back from a 10-day or a 14-day quarantine, and then for no fault of anyone's, perhaps in one of their 7 periods or their lunch period, they find themselves within 6 feet of another positive case. And so that cycle of potentially going in and out of those quarantines. And for us, you know, obviously our vision is exceptional educational experiences for everyone. And so our teachers are working really, really hard, and we're providing a lot of training for them. And we're asking them to teach in ways that they weren't trained to do in undergraduate school or graduate school. And so we're working very hard with them and working on that training to teach in this way at the level we expect at Center Grove. And they're doing a fantastic job. It is a process that's going to take a while. But even just the 4 days that we've had so far this week, every day has gotten tremendously better as our teachers have had an opportunity to practice these new ways of delivery. and we're gonna continue to get better. I know next week we'll even be better than we were this week, and that progress will just continue. So I really appreciate the question. Thank you very much. Are there any other I can help with?
Not for me. Thank you, Dr. Hart.
Thanks.
Dr. Henderson?
Thanks for the opportunity to be here and address your questions and hopefully shed some light on the decision-making processes that we utilized. I would echo everything that Mr. Smith and Dr. Harp have said. Some of our largest concerning areas at the high school level have to do with cafeteria. And we have approximately 600 kids eating lunch in a 30-minute block of time, spread out as much as we could. We took all of our cafeteria tables that used to occupy the cafeteria. We spread them all the way out into the Hall of Excellence, all the way to door number 9. And I will tell you, kids love it, and I don't know that we'll ever put them back in the cafeteria because they like the natural light. They like the fact that their tables are spread further apart. We don't find nearly as many grapes on the floor because the targets are farther away for them. So there have been some really interesting things. And I have to say, first and foremost, that I'm incredibly proud of our kids and our staff for their dedication and their compliance to a mask mandate. It is rare that I ever have to say anything to a kid about putting a mask on. And when I do, they immediately apologize, put the mask up. The most frequent times are when they're walking in the morning and they're by themselves, walking in from their car, and they haven't put their mask on yet. And they walk in door number 9, and I'm typically standing right inside door number 9, or I'm out at the car line. And I remind them, hey, don't forget to mask up. And they're like, oh, sorry. And they immediately put it on. So I have to say that our kids have done a remarkable job of doing everything that we've asked them to do. They clearly want to be in school, and we clearly want them to be there. The collateral damage that's caused when we have a positive test, when we are at full capacity, is very real. And it creates 14 days where that individual, as you've already heard, is now thrust into learning from home and not having direct contact with a teacher. The blended model, and in particular the blended model utilizing a pink day, as we typically refer to it, which is a combination of our red day and white day. You mix red and white and you get pink. So every class period meets. When you look at our schedule, it appears as though a kid has 10 classes because the periods are numbered 1 through 10. If you look this year, period 3 and 8, which are our typical STAR period and AIM period, we removed those from the schedule this year, and those don't meet. So every kid has 7 classes and a study hall. So if we were to do a blended model utilizing an alternating block, students would only see their kid 1 time a week, or their teacher 1 time a week. Using the modified pink day schedule, it allows our students to have 2 days of face-to-face contact with their teacher. Doesn't increase the minutes. It's still 90 minutes, but it's 90 minutes over 2 days to give a kid an opportunity on their off day to come back and ask the teacher a question about some of the work that they've been given, rather than waiting 4 days to see that teacher in person again. So we felt like that was the best model given the current circumstances. I think that we are finding that our teachers are adapting. They kind of all have just about become Marines. You know, improvise, adapt, and overcome is the mantra of the Marines. And I think our teachers sometimes feel like they may be at war against an unseen enemy, right? And they're having to improvise, and they're having to adapt, and they're having to overcome. We had lots of questions about why the transition to a week of e-learning prior to moving into a blended model, not just moving directly into a blended model. And the answer to that is pretty simple. Our teachers had never taught in a blended model before. They had some experience teaching in an e-learning model last fall, or last spring, excuse me. And so we needed to give them some time to wrap their head around and to have time to work in their PLC teams with their fellow teachers of their courses to figure out exactly what teaching on a blended model needed to look like. And we provided them with the 4 examples that Mrs. Hoover spoke about here are some things that you can think about in terms of the way in which you teach. Additionally, a modified pink day lends itself to a similar instructional rhythm for a teacher as a alternating block day does. So you have an on day with a group of kids and an off day with a group of kids, just like you do in an alternating block. Obviously, the time is reduced, and we recognize that, and so we have to get really good at identifying what the critical pieces of our instruction are. Super proud of our students, as I said, super proud of our teachers for doing what they're doing, and ultimately, our goal is to be back 100% in attendance. That's why we do this. But that's a little bit of insight into why the blended model, and in particular a modified pink day schedule, are put into play. Also have had a lot of questions about why do kids go from period 1 to period 6 and then from period 2 to period 7? Why don't you just put them all in order? That has a lot to do with shared students and shared staff. We have a lot of middle school students who come to the high school and take high school courses on our campus for credit. We have shared staff that work between the buildings. So we need to keep all of the morning classes in the morning so that our teachers and their students align. So first period and sixth period are the equivalent of the first 2 periods of the day. So we put those back to back. And that means that first period and sixth period take up about the same amount of time that first period or sixth period would on their own. And then the schedule just plays itself out like that. So those are some of the questions that we've kind of entertained that may not be obvious to someone who doesn't live it every day and maybe doesn't give consideration to the interconnectedness between the 3 secondary schools and the way in which we share staff and share students.
Thank you, Dr.
Anything else?
Gentlemen, thank you, and just for the record, they were not prepared to speak tonight. I kind of put the guys on the spot, so I think they'll probably meet me out back later when we're done. But thank you, gentlemen, and I see some of the staff sitting towards the back. I want to pass my appreciation on to all the teachers and staff who, you know, I'm a fan of the book, Who Moved My Cheese, and there's a lot of cheese being moved right now, and the staff is doing a fantastic job. The administrators are doing a fantastic job. I can't thank Mrs. Norman enough. You know, I don't think anybody ever expected when she took the job to be the director of student health services during a pandemic, and it's really upset her workday and world, and she's been at this trying to figure out how to handle this since June. And I know whenever anybody gets the phone call from her, everybody cringes because I think everybody knows what's about the next words are about to come out of her mouth. But I do want to thank everybody. There is a lot of moving parts when we have to make these kinds of decisions, so it's not just something Dr. Arkanoff woke up one morning and decided we're going to go to e-learning and a blended model, because there's a lot of moving parts. I've gotten emails that suggested that. We've gotten emails that suggested we did this for the football season, and let me assure everybody that was not the case either. You know, we've gotten all sorts of reasons why we did it, and I think these guys shared, you know, some of the data that drove the decision that was made. And I can tell you the 4 of us sitting up here and Mr. Hubbard online have probably asked some of the tougher questions before those decisions ever get made as well. And Dr. Arkanoff probably had more hair 3 weeks ago when this whole process started.
Yesterday.
Yesterday is when this whole process started, so.
Mrs. Norman, I've got a clarification I want to ask you, and I just want to make sure it's clear. Could you go back, Pam, to one of her initial slides, if that's at all possible? Okay, yeah, just go back to one of your initial slides, because I noticed something that was on all your early slides. Right there, that's good enough.
Yes,
Right at the top, it says Indiana State Department of Health.
yes,
So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that these rules on quarantine, these rules on isolation, these are not Center Grove rules.
correct.
Could you explain that just a little more?
Yeah, in fact, I was on the call today with the State Department of Health in regards to that exact question. So there is a hierarchy that goes into this. There's the CDC, there's your state departments of health all across the country, there's your local health departments, and then there's your schools. The directive that I have been given and have been told is that we are allowed to go more stringent as you go down the line, but we can't be less. I know that there's been some discussion about how it's thrown, the State Department lists everything as recommendations, and they are not requirements. At the same time, it is a matter of public health. It is not, in regards to different things that we do, there are things I can do with my own children in my home in regards to the health that I cannot ask someone else at a school corporation to do. I don't feel that it's appropriate for us to do less than what the state has told us we have to do. At that point, that's just kind of how they have laid it out to us. Are there ramifications if we didn't do these? From what I understand today, yes. Yes, there are. And so at this point in time, the guidance is the guidance, and that's what we're going to follow. Our local county health department has also said we should follow them.
And
So,
correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had to submit plans to the IDOE
correct.
and the State
Yes.
Department of Health and the Johnson County Department of Health to get approval. We had to do it for graduation.
And so we did that, we did that for graduation. We've done that for all of the extracurricular activities from the secondary level up. They're actually rather extensive plans that for them to kind of review and determine if what we're doing is appropriate and okay. Hence the contact tracing at the middle school cross-country meet last night that I participated with, And all I could think was, oh, I hope we don't have to do this, because I don't know how I would do that. The seating charts are hard enough. I cannot imagine. So,
We do thank you.
oh, thanks,
you're-
thanks. I would just like to say my clinic staff is doing as much as they can to try to maneuver through this. I know that it is frustrating when parents get calls from me and from them. I know that it is not a phone call anybody wants to receive. And I know that there's just a lot of frustration in the world on the whole, and I understand that.
Thank them from us also.
I will do
for all
that.
they do.
I will do that. Thank you.
And I would kind of echo what Mr. Alexander touched on too. I don't know that the community understands what this administration has done. And when I say the administration, we're talking about Dr. Arkanoff and everybody you heard from today, and a lot of them sitting in the back. The time, the planning, the thought, everything that's gone into this, I've been so impressed. I mean, I've been with this group for 3.5 years, and they impress me more every day. Our middle school, high school principals are doing a wonderful job. A lot of us have kids in this school. I have a senior this year. Last thing I want is her to be e-learning. I want her in school. But right now, this is the best thing that we can do. We'll continue to reevaluate. As Dr. Arkanoff said, our goal is to go back to full traditional, but we want to do it in a safe way. If the CDC changes its recommendations, if the CDC changes quarantine and isolation rules, that changes the game. But right now, the A/B blended model, at least for the next couple weeks, let's give it a try. Let's be patient. Let's show grace. We'll get through this together. So I applaud everybody, and the students, the staff, the parents, the community. We're going to get through this. We're going to be fine. But thank you, administrators. Thank you, teachers. Thank you, students. Thank you, everybody, for all you've done.
I would
Thank you.
echo those comments that he has just finished. I am so proud of our Center Grove staff, and it just makes my heart beat fast to think that with the situation like we have, that we have people like you taking care of our students. And I'm in great thanks to what you're doing for us.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, it's a fluid learning curve for the staff.
Absolutely.
For the students, for you as parents, the community. It's almost a 24-hour learning curve that's going on there. And as we've always done, that's kind of just something that's underlying in our decisions, what is best for the students? And in this type of situation, we have to err on the side of caution, even though that may not be what we want. I would love traditional school. I've been in and around schools since 1961, when I was a first grader here. And, you know, I love school, and I know what these kids are missing out on, and it, as Carol said, it really hurts your heart when you see some of the things they're missing out on because of this pandemic. But we have to err on the side of caution, like it or not, with some of these decisions. And then, like we've said, 48 hours from now, the rug could be pulled out from under us, or a nice new rug could be laid down. We don't know. We don't have that crystal ball. So we have to deal with, almost on a daily basis, with the information that we have. And as Carol said, very proud, I know the whole board is, very proud of staff, the students, community, because, you know, parents are having to change everything too. It's 24-hour periods. So kudos to the Center Grove community as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Yes, Mr. Hubbard, do you have anything to add?
Just real quick, I don't know if I'm assuming you guys have people there from the public, from outside, but I do want them to know that, you know, we got their emails, you know, all thousands of them, and not all were positive about this. Some were negative, some were very heartfelt, some were, you could tell a lot of time and effort went into them. And if your response was a 1 or 2 line from Dr. Arkanal or from one of us, you know, please don't take it personal. We just had so many, it was so overwhelming. I love to see that kind of interaction with parents and taking an active role in their children. And I support every one of you, and nobody wants these kids more in school than I do. I know Nora was talking about the free lunches, and kids have the opportunity to kind of take that home with them and stuff. You know, even that's kind of, I don't know, I'm big on free lunches. I'm big on in-person, you know, children's being in front of teachers, because that's when most times depression is diagnosed in students, or students kind of just get that interaction with the teachers, and it's really important. And, you know, if it wasn't for a teacher when I was in high school, I wouldn't have taken my first step to go into the military. So I still thank that person to this day for doing that. The only thing I would like to say is we did get a lot of emails on that. I'm glad you guys brought it up about the recommendation part versus mandated us. I'm glad Nora touched on that. I'm glad she said that, because I was going to ask somebody to touch on that. So anyways, even, you know, like she said, even though it's a recommendation, currently I think the board and the administration is doing a really good job to try to work within their guidelines, because let's be honest, none of us are subject matter experts in any of this. We got to take their lead on this, even whether we agree with it or not. You know, it's the err on the at the end of the day, if it was up to me, we would be back in school tomorrow, but it's just not. And I apologize to all the parents that are there that was hoping to get that changed, thinking that the board had that decision or the choice to do that. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you being available. I knew you couldn't be here tonight. Are there any other questions or comments from board members before we move to the next item on the agenda?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have the opportunity for public comment, and we, as we say, we enjoy hearing from our community. There are 4 individuals who've signed up tonight for public comment. According to our rules, you get 3 minutes. Mr. Alexander will keep the timer, and I'll call you in the order that you've signed up. And the rule that we have with public comment, as I see the topics that you've all signed up on, is it has to be something that's on the agenda. And it appears you're all talking about what we've just been spent the last 45 minutes talking about. So this is great that you're here for that topic. So first, Kelly Sponsel.
Hold up, Mr.
Oh, I'm
Davis.
sorry, hold
I'll
on.
give a 30-second warning when you have 30 seconds to go. Or left.
May I ask a question before?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
There is a big hook that comes out and pulls your arm.
That's why Jack's sitting where he's at. You just keep an eye on him.
Jack's the hook man.
My question is, are you tracking the children who have been placed in quarantine who did not test positive? It is my understanding that none of those children are sick, of the nearly 400 that have been quarantined. And so one of the thoughts that we had as parents is that if we can track these children and we find that none of them are sick and they are spending 2 weeks at home healthy, perhaps if we see a continued pattern of that, we could approach the Indiana Department of Health together to say perhaps their restrictions are too stringent.
Well, first, I guess in response to that, I appreciate the way you asked the question, because it means you get it. You get the idea that it's this Department of Health that's telling us to do that, and then I'll let Mrs. Norman respond as it relates to what we do with tracking.
Yes, in fact, yeah, we are tracking that.
Okay.
I keep track of it consistently every day. I can't share
Sure.
what
That's
that
okay.
looks like right now, but yeah, we are tracking it. I mean, to be honest, my whole goal is that in quarantine, no one gets sick. That's the purpose of it, that's the goal of it, that's why we're wearing the face coverings. At this point, that decision is at the CDC level. The Indiana Department of Health, my hope is, like I said, you know, they take the CDC's guidelines and then they determine that for each state.
Right.
So like when we were talking about it with them today, part of the discussion was like when you look at other states, such as New York or California, those states have much more stringent requirements than what we have. The changes that were made this week were to bring Indiana more in line with what the CDC issued. My personal hope is that at some point, we're gonna have enough evidence that face coverings are working, and the CDC will change what quarantine looks like. And if I can get a little more space,
Sure.
I can win the battle. But at this point, I'm just, we're sort of stuck.
Sure.
I am definitely tracking.
Okay, we thought we wanted, thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Mrs. Norman, appreciate that.
Thank you for all you're doing.
So in the other aspect of that, as part of some of the conversations we've been having, the board has some outlets, once we have some sufficient data through the Indiana School Boards Association, they have a lobbying group that we can tap into once we get far enough down the road where we have some of that data. I believe the Superintendent's Association has a very similar group that can do those types of things as well. So those are some outlets that we have begun having conversations about, but we gotta have a little bit more data before we have an opportunity to do that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Thank-
And I have learned a lot here tonight. I prepared these comments before this meeting, and I actually have learned, but I'm gonna share them anyway, if that's okay. I'm Kelly Sponsel. I have a sophomore at Center Grove High School and a 5th grader at Maple Grove Elementary. And first of all, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to share here this evening some thoughts that have been on my heart and mind the last few days. I'm the first of 3 parents that will present here this evening on behalf of many, many parents that want more than anything for our students to return to in-person, full-time learning. I want to start by saying how grateful we are to all of you for your very careful planning for this school year in the midst of this pandemic, and especially that we were given the opportunity for input and for choice. And to add how much we appreciate our incredible teachers who continue to go above and beyond under impossible circumstances. Most of us who made the decision for our children to return to school in person did so knowing that our kids might be exposed to COVID. That there are now some positive cases in our district was 100% foreseeable. And the vast majority of families that chose this option knew these risks, and we chose to send our children to school in spite of them. What came as a surprise to so many of us that chose in person was that the option was only available for a little over a week. We understand that it was not the number of positive cases, but rather the masses of students that were required to quarantine that resulted in such an immediate shutdown. With that said, the COVID virus is here. It is not going anywhere, and the list of repercussions as it pertains to the school closures last spring from the American Academy of Pediatrics is lengthy and includes an increase in physical abuse, substance abuse, and depression. The AAP also states that the goal of schools should only be to mitigate the risk, not to eliminate it. In our opinion, having roughly 400 students quarantined when less than 10 tested positive goes well beyond mitigation. Earlier in the summer, you gave us a choice, and the families of our community made the best choice we could with the information we had. But once school started, some families who originally chose in-person learning became understandably fearful when they saw that the hallways were crowded and not all of the kids were following protocol. In light of the fact that we have now had several days to see what in-person learning looks like during a pandemic, we propose that the school corporation consider giving giving families the option to re-vote and to pledge their commitment to either virtual or in-person learning for the duration of the semester. This will allow families who are no longer comfortable with in-person learning based on what they have seen to go virtual if that's what they choose. As for the rest of us, we chose, and we still choose, in-person school. A math teacher explaining an algebra equation to a struggling student, a choir learning a piece of music, not in front of a computer, but in a room where they can hear their beautiful harmonies come together. These and a million other things that could never happen outside of a classroom. These are the reasons we choose in-person learning. COVID is real and it's not going anywhere. So let's take the necessary precautions, but let's allow those precautions to work for us and to give us the security we need to open our schools every single day for every single child whose desire is to learn in person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate your comments. Next, I believe we have Mr. Garth Wright.
Thank you. Again, my comments were made before I sat through tonight's thing. Can I ask a question real quick
Yeah.
first? On the blended model, there were basically in school learning 2 days a week for the students. Why the 1 day off? Why the 1 day e-learning?
The Wednesday is a professional development day that we have with teachers. And so part of that day, it's a half-day schedule, or not a half-day, it's a shortened schedule. And so we wanted to keep that consistency there, that day for training, because especially if we're going to continue down the path of any kind of different learning, whether it's blended or other, we need that time for training with teachers.
And it won't apply the next week because of the holiday.
Sure.
So really, it's, instead of 9 out of 9 days, it's 8 out of 9 days.
I was
Give
just
the
thinking-
teachers the A, B, and then give them the day to regroup, and then keep going.
I was just thinking, if we go past the 14th, 3 days in learning, 1 week for one group of students, and then 3 days the next week.
That hasn't been decided yet,
Gotcha.
but I do appreciate the question.
Okay.
So we'll start the 3 minutes now.
Dr. Arkanoff?
Yes.
Center Grove School Board, thank you for allowing us to
Absolutely.
be here today.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for keeping our children and our staff safe. Since day one of the COVID shutdown, the goal was to flatten the curve, allowing hospitals, manufacturing to catch up. That time has passed. The hospitals are practically empty. You can purchase PPE from anywhere from Menards to Sam's Club. What's the goal now? Are we going to ever get to 0 cases? Likely not going to happen. Since the early 1940s, the vaccine was available for both strands of the flu. However, each year we still lose 60 to 80,000 Americans. 80 years of vaccine and still too many people get the flu and too many people die. We need to figure out a way to live with this new virus. I work for a local corporation, around 1,200 essential workers. We never shut down. We remained open from day one. We took advantage of social distancing, PPE. We even bought pallets of hand sanitizer. Since March, we only had a handful of employees that contracted the virus. And through contract tracing, no other employee ever was tested positive for the virus. We also didn't start wearing masks until, July 27th, when the governor mandated it. So, and that was governor's #1 reason for the mask, was to get kids back in school. What can we learn from other school corporations? Brownsburg School Corporation has basically said they're not shutting down unless the state requires them to do it. Brownsburg, similar size to us, has 8,700 students. They've been in school since early July. To date, they've had about 11 cases. and they've quarantined about 175 students. Not one of the quarantined students has developed the virus. Greenfield School Systems has about 14,000 students, 12 cases. They've been in school for a little over 3 weeks, and no one through contract tracing has had a positive case. What are they doing different, and how can we learn from these other school districts? Brownsburg, through Superintendent Snap, has given us their seating chart, like how they form rows forward-facing, 6 feet in between the rows, but the forward-facing rows are butted up right next to each other. I've got a sample of their seating chart. That way, only the front person and the person behind the person that tested positive has to be quarantined. Athletes in some of these school systems are setting alarms on their phones. They're moving around the room every 15 minutes because they want to play football or whatever other sport they have. Brownsburg added 6 minutes between lunches so that the admin and coaches and grade level teams can come in and clean the tables. They're assigned tables, and each table has a number. The children eat at the same table every day with the same group. They wear a mask until the time they are required to eat. Then they eat in time periods of about 14 to 15 minutes.
Mr. Wright, your time's running low. If you could wrap it up, that'd be great.
Eliminating the contract tracing. They also added more lunches so that many more students can eat. They do not allow children to change clothes at gym, and each day after, admin visits each room and measures to make sure everything is still 6 feet apart. These steps could be eliminated with painter's tape. Prior to this, the COVID-19, I had straight A students. Because of the ripple effect, from ending school early last year, some of my kids are getting C's. It's not fun. That's my only problem is that they're getting C's. They have everything else taken care of, but fortunately for other kids, it's more than just bad grades. So,
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Thank you.
If you want to send that seating chart up via email, please do. Thank you. Next, we have Brittany Carroll.
I will probably be repeating a few things that have already been stated tonight as well. I apologize, but so that I can rapid fire through my message, I'll just read it.
And that's okay. As you notice, we kind of repeat too, so.
Okay, perfect.
We'll start your time when you start speaking.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Arkanoff, school board members, administrators, teachers, the true heroes and staff, we appreciate you all and the tremendous undertaking it is to keep up with these ever-changing information related to COVID-19 and to balance all that against the other important priorities in determining the best interests of the students. We're here tonight to offer our support, our ideas, and ourselves to do everything we can to keep our school doors open this year. Unfortunately, no additional rules or mandated compliance would eliminate the spread of the virus any more than what the students and teachers are diligently doing right now. While our COVID positive numbers are low to non-existent in Center Grove schools and even considered minimal as a community at large, according to Governor Holcomb's report yesterday, we understand the problem is not the low COVID positive number, but the masses of students who have been swept into quarantine due to close contact association within the school, one of my own children included. To avoid this colossal dragnet, ultimately, as we previously discussed, the local and state boards of health will need to relax the guidelines so that fewer healthy students are forced to quarantine based on a close contact. For example, perhaps no quarantine is imposed on students who wear a mask during the close contact. Or perhaps the definition of close contact reduces the circumference from the 6-foot hula hoop to the 3-foot hula hoop. Such less restrictive guidelines are not far-fetched. Just yesterday, the CDC reversed its position, stating it now recommends close contacts should monitor themselves for symptoms rather than quarantine. Determining less restrictive guidelines while maintaining efficacy is probably the most important variable in terms of keeping kids learning in person for this school year. Upon the return to school of those identified as close contacts, schools could obtain essential data with a 2-question survey. Number 1, did you test positive for COVID-19 in the last 14 days? And number 2, if yes, were you hospitalized as a result? Assuming that responses to these questions are overwhelmingly or consistently no, as has been reported in other school corporations, this data could be provided to the local and state health departments to help them reevaluate and hopefully loosen the guidelines that the school corporation is required to follow. This overarching goal will not be met immediately. In the meantime, please use us, parents, as an untapped resource. If parent volunteers would be allowed in the building, we could measure and mark with tape classroom seating to maximize forward-facing space to minimize student contact. We could take temperatures as students are entering the buildings. We could assist as couriers for students' study materials and facilitate parent pickup. Outside of school hours, we could fundraise for PPE, recruit additional substitute teachers, adding our own names to the list, write letters citing statistics to the health departments in an effort to get quarantine guidelines reevaluated. Additionally, the school corporation may consider forming a parent focus group for issues related to COVID-19, or may choose to proactively add a week of e-learning or hybrid learning in the months of January, February, and May,
Your
so
time's
that
running low, if you could
each
start wrapping up.
remaining month of the school year has a reset week like we're currently doing. Ultimately, we know the risks of COVID. We firmly believe our children's ability to learn in person this school year far outweighs those risks.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. I do have to ask you one question. I hear through the grapevine that you're an attorney by trade.
Yes,
Can I ask where?
I was previously with the firm Church Hittle and
Oh,
Antrim.
great, okay. I'm at the Ferveran up in Fishers. so-
Oh, perfect. Well, then
So-
you know the commute well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sue Trainer, she's not a church.
No.
We have one more speaker, Catherine Francis.
Hello. My comments are not nearly as polished as theirs because I didn't come with anything really prepared. I actually had written the school board a letter earlier in the week, but I understand now you've gotten thousands of them. So I'm not going to go over everything that I wrote in the letter, but I would like to make a couple of points that I think I haven't actually heard anything about in any of the presentations yet. And keep in mind, my mother was a teacher for 40 years. She's recently, well, not recently, she retired about 8 years ago. In order to deal with e-learning and blended learning, she actually drives to my home and lives with me for 3 days a week. I have a 70-year-old woman coming to my home to teach my children for me so that I can go do my job. And that's fabulous because I have her as a resource, but it's terrifying because she's 70 years old and she's around my kids every day. So, kind of a sticky situation to be in. So I'm not anti-teacher. I appreciate everything you're doing. But my story is that my kid was one of those 400 kids that was out on labeled quarantined in the attendance system. Now, my kid popped a fever on Monday night last week. He had it for exactly 4 hours. Now, he popped this fever right after football practice. He also had a headache. I kind of figured, well, crap, this could be quarantine, this could be COVID. It could also have been he got overheated at football practice and he was dehydrated, okay? So when he woke up the next day and he was perfectly fine, on any other ordinary day, I'd send him to school. But I didn't. I kept him home. We took him to the doctor. We had him tested. He's negative. He never showed another hiccup of any variety after that 4-hour fever on that Monday night. But my kid's labeled as one of those quarantine or COVID absences when he likely had nothing to do with COVID. And I'm kicking myself as a parent for contributing to the statistical problem that you're using as the reason to do all of this. And I just want to caution you that parents like me will learn that lesson, and the next time I think he just got overheated at football practice, I'm going to send him to school the next day.
30 seconds.
Okay. I also really want to know, it's really a question more than anything, but we've already lost 18 instructional days. If we go back full-time on the 14th of September, We've already lost 18 instructional days out of 180. I don't know if you call the e-learning days instructional days, but in-person instructional days, we'll have lost 18 by the 14th of September. My question is, do you have any idea if they're gonna actually demand standardized testing this year and take more of those days away from in-person instruction because you have to give an in-person NWEA or Ames Web or something or other?
Understood. Your time's
Yeah,
running
that's
low,
fine. I
and
just don't,
I don't know personally if that decision's been made yet. That is a very good question. And I'm sure the legislature and the Department of Education will be giving guidance. But yeah, I think that's a very good issue that needs to be considered. So I do want to,
I
go
would
ahead.
like to address that one.
Absolutely.
Is I would encourage every parent to write your legislators and encourage them to not do standardized testing again this year. And I will say this, and I said it before COVID, it's the biggest waste of money in public education. Millions and millions of dollars that we could be putting into the direct education of children, and it's being spent on standardized testing. So thanks for asking that question, and I would really encourage parents to please write your legislators, call them, whatever, go knock on their door and tell them to stop spending money on standardized testing.
And I want to thank the four speakers. I mean, you get it. We're all in this together. If there's something we can do to change the rules, let's do it. If not, we're going to do the best we can within those rules to give in-person instruction. Whether it's traditional, whether it's AB, we're going to do the best we can. So thank you, everybody. Okay, moving on next, we have our consent items. All right, I apologize, I skipped. We have the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Has every, you're correct. On the consent items, has everybody had a chance to review the consent items?
Yes.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. President, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Thank you, Mr. Russell. All those in favor of approving the consent items, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Mr. Hubbard?
Joe's an aye. I'm an aye.
The ayes have it, 6-0. I think Mr. Hubbard voted twice. Thank you, Joe. Next, we're moving on to the action items. And we just have a couple of action items tonight. The first action item is to consider and potentially approve the board and superintendent goals for the year. And I believe Dr. Arkanoff, you're presenting?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Daniels. This evening, we have 3 board goals in front of you, superintendent and board goals. 2 of them, goal 2 and 3, are from last year. We're going to continue working on those 2 goals. We made some great progress towards them. Goal 1 is a new goal, and that goal is that the school board and the superintendent will support the work and efforts of the staff and administration to emerge from the global pandemic stronger and more innovative as a corporation. So I just present those goals to you. There's a working draft. If you would like to discuss those, we can then you can then vote on them and approve them as corporation and superintendent goals.
And I know that goal number 2 and goal number 3 were our goals from last year.
Yes.
Correct.
I was just going to say that.
And in essence, I won't say moved them down because all 3 goals are important,
That's right.
but we've put the pandemic at the top.
Right.
So with that being said, does anybody have any questions or comments with respect to the working draft of the board and superintendent goals for 2020, 2021?
Mr. Daniels, there is some wording that I would like to look at. When it says the school board and superintendent will support the work, it hit me as that being a rubber stamp situation. I'd like to look at that the school board and the superintendent will collaborate with the work and efforts of the staff and administration.
Well, I think if anything, in my 3.5 years on the board, they know we're not a rubber stamp.
I know that, but I don't want it in print.
I would support that change. Does anyone else have any comments on the change? I shouldn't say support because that's the word we're getting rid of. I would be in favor of that change.
But there's places where it's okay.
I'm good with the change, Mr. Daniels.
I'm okay with that.
Joe, do you have any comments on the suggested change of, instead of the school board and superintendent will support the work and efforts, it would say the school board and superintendent will collaborate with the work and efforts. Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Hubbard, as a change?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I saw Jack's email on that. I
Okay,
think it's a
great.
good idea.
Any other comments on any of the board goals that are in front of us? Or,
I hope we get an opportunity to get refocused on goals 2 and 3, because I
Yeah.
think goal 1 is gonna consume an awful lot of our time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Did we get a vote?
No.
any other comments? Can I hear a motion?
Mr. President, I recommend that we approve the 2020 and 2021 board and superintendent goals.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Just for the record, I want to make sure it's clear that goal number 1 in the motion will be amended to say the school board and superintendent will collaborate with the work and efforts of the staff and administration to emerge from the global pandemic stronger and more innovative as a corporation. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mr. Hubbard?
Aye.
The ayes have it, 5-0. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Next, we have a second reading of proposed policy revisions. Dr. Bill Long will be presenting. And Dr. Long, I think the last meeting we had, you just parked up here. It took you an hour and a half to get to the front this time.
You know, listening to our secondary principals talk, it reminds me of when I was younger and used to be a principal. I had lots of words then. I don't have very many words anymore. I'm running out,
But we appreciate your loyalty and your service to Center Grove over the years.
tonight is the second reading of 2 policies. One is our attendance policy and one is our face covering policy. As we normally do, there's been no changes, no recommended changes, so I don't read them all over again. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have from the second time, but we're recommending that the board approve both of these policies tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Long. Do we have any questions or comments with respect to the proposed policy revisions? This is our second reading, and I think we had questions and comments first time around, but are there any new questions or comments?
No, sir.
I have none.
Mr. Hubbard?
I have no question.
Hearing none, can I hear a motion?
I move that we approve new policy 5511.1.0 and revisions to policy 5200 as presented.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander and Mr. Russell. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Oh, sorry
I'm
about that. Mr. Hubbard, are you in favor?
He said
I'm an aye.
Okay, 5-0. I moved on too quickly to oppose, and I got his eye in that.
Thank
But
you.
5-0. That was my fault. Seeing that we've completed our agenda, now we move on to other business. Mrs. Toomey, do you have any other business to raise this evening?
I do not.
Mr. Russell?
I do not.
Mr. Alexander?
No, none this evening.
Mr. Hubbard?
Nothing other than thanking those 4 individuals for taking time out of their evening to come up and present that to us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. And I'll second that. Thanks to the community. Thanks to everybody here. We're going to get through this. Mr. Arkanoff, Dr. Arkanoff, do you have anything to add?
Just same thing. I just appreciate everybody coming out and sharing with us, and of course, everyone that came outside too. So thank
Absolutely.
you so much. As I said before, our parents are what make us a great school corporation because they give us great kids. So thank you.
Absolutely. A couple of announcements to make. September 7th is a holiday, and our next regularly scheduled meeting is September 24th, a regular board meeting at 7 o'clock. And keep your eyes open. I'm sure our wonderful superintendent, Dr. Arkanoff, will be doing another coffee chat in the coming weeks. So just keep your eyes open. The attendance for that, I think it's wonderful to get parents to ask questions that if we can't answer them right then, we can answer them later. So thank you for that, Dr. Arkanoff. I think it's really adding a lot to keeping people informed under the situation.
Thank you.
With that being said, do I have an motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye?
Aye.
Mr. Hubbard?
I'm an aye. I'm an
Yep.
aye.
The ayes have it. We're adjourned. Have a good evening.
So we're going to clear out the room in just a couple of minutes, and then we got to move to an executive session. But we have a couple of minutes, so.
Or did Dr. Arkanoff either one? Cemetery, Nelson? Yeah. Uh-huh. They changed the rule.
They've changed the rules.
Now it's aggregate. So, yeah, because some schools doing that, they changed the rule.
This way, this way. I know it's a hassle.
No, but, they've been measuring, they've been doing lots of things, and
And
yeah, I appreciate that. We'll continue to look at all of those options. So
We
please send
actually
it.
work with Jim Snap. Yeah, he's part of what's called the Growing Schools Coalition, and our coalition.
Yeah, I'm pull this up, put it right here. I'll shut the room down.